Καλησπέρα και καλώς ήρθατε σε άλλη μία λέξη εκφραστικής ανάγνωσης εν μέσω κορονοϊού 2020. Laurence Sterne, The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy, Gentleman. Multitudinis imperite non formido judicia, meis tamen rogo parcant opusculis, in quibus fuit propositi semper, aiocis ad seris vicissim ad iocos transire. Ioan Sares Beriensis, Episcopus Lugdum, Volume 3. Chapter 1. I wish, Dr. Slop, quoth my Uncle Toby, repeating his wish for Dr. Slop a second time, and with a degree of more zeal and earnestness in his manner of wishing than he had wished it at first. I wish, Dr. Slop, quoth my Uncle Toby, you had seen what prodigious armies we had in Flanders. My Uncle Toby's wish did Dr. Slop a disservice which his heart never intended any man. Sir, it confounded him, and thereby putting his ideas first into confusion, and then to flight, he could not rally them again for the soul of him. In all disputes, male or female, whether for honour, for profit, or for love, it makes no difference in the case. Nothing is more dangerous, madam, than a wish coming sideways in this unexpected manner upon a man. The safest way, in general, to take off the force of the wish is for the party wished at instantly to get up upon his legs, and wish the wisher something in return, of pretty near the same value, so balancing the account upon the spot, you stand as you were, may sometimes gain the advantage of the attack by it. This will be fully illustrated to the world in my chapter of wishes. Dr. Slop did not understand the nature of this defence. He was puzzled with it, and it put an entire stop to the dispute for 4 minutes and a half. 5 had been fatal to it. My father saw the danger. The dispute was one of the most interesting disputes in the world, whether the child of his prayers and endeavours should be born without a head or with one. He waited to the last moment to allow Dr. Slop, in whose behalf the wish was made, his right of returning it, but perceiving, I say, that he was confounded, and continued looking with that perplexed vacuity of eye which puzzled souls generally stare with, first in my Uncle Toby's face, then in his, then up, then down, then east and by east, and so on, coasting it along by the plinth of the wainscot till he had got to the opposite point of the compass, and that he had actually begun to count the brass nails upon the arm of his chair, my father thought there was no time to be lost with my Uncle Toby, so took up this discourse as follows. Chapter 2. What prodigious armies you had in Flanders! Brother Toby, replied my father, taking his wig from off his head with his right hand, and with his left pulling out a striped India handkerchief from his right coat pocket in order to rub his head, as he argued the point with my Uncle Toby. Now, in this I think my father was much to blame, and I will give you my reasons for it. Matters of no more seeming consequence in themselves than whether my father should have taken off his wig with his right hand or with his left, have divided the greatest kingdoms, and made the crowns of the monarchs who governed them to totter upon their heads. But need I tell you, sir, that the circumstances with which everything in this world is begirt give everything in this world its size and shape, and by tightening it, or relaxing it, this way or that, make the thing to be what it is, great, little, good, bad, indifferent, or not indifferent, just as the case happens. As my father's India handkerchief was in his right coat pocket, he should by no means have suffered his right hand to have got engaged. On the contrary, instead of taking off his wig with it, as he did, he ought to have committed that entirely to the left, and then, when the natural exigency my father was under of rubbing his head called out for his handkerchief, he would have had nothing in the world to have done but to have put his right hand into his right coat pocket and taken it out, which he might have done without any violence, or the least ungraceful twist in any one tendon or muscle of his whole body. In this case, unless indeed my father had been resolved to make a fool of himself by holding the wig stiff in his left hand, or by making some nonsensical angle or other at his elbow joint or armpit, his whole attitude had been easy, natural, unforced. Reynolds himself, as great and gracefully as he paints, might have painted him as he sat. Now, as my father managed this matter, consider what devil of a figure my father made of himself. In the latter end of Queen Anne's reign, and in the beginning of the reign of King George I, coat pockets were cut very low down in the skirt. I need say no more. The father of mischief had he been hammering at it a month, could not have contrived a worse fashion for one in my father's situation. Chapter 3. It was not an easy matter in any king's reign, unless you were as lean a subject as myself, to have forced your hand diagonally, quite across your whole body, so as to gain the bottom of your opposite coat pocket. In the year 1718, when this happened, it was extremely difficult, so that when my Uncle Toby discovered the transverse zigzaggery of my father's approaches towards it, it instantly brought into his mind those he had done duty in before the gate of St. Nicholas, the idea of which drew off his attention so entirely from the subject in debate that he had got his right hand to the bell to ring up Trim, to go and fetch his map of Namur and his compasses and sector along with it, to measure the turning angles of the traverses of that attack, but particularly of that one where he received his wound upon his groin. My father knit his brows, and as he knit them, all the blood in his body seemed to rush up into his face. My Uncle Toby dismounted immediately. I did not apprehend your Uncle Toby was a horseback. Chapter 4. A man's body and his mind, with the utmost reverence to both I speak it, are exactly like a jerkin and a jerkin's lining. Rumple the one, you rumple the other. There is one certain exception, however, in this case, and that is when you are so fortunate a fellow as to have had your jerkin made of gum taffeta and the body lining to it of a sarsenet or thin Persian. Zeno, Cleanthes, Diogenes Babylonius, Dionysius Heracleotes, Antipater, Paniotius, and Posidonius amongst the Greeks, Cato and Varro and Seneca amongst the Romans, Pantanus and Clemens Alexandrinus and Montaigne amongst the Christians, and a score and a half of good, honest, unthinking, Shandian people as ever lived, whose names I can't recollect, all pretended that their jerkins were made after this fashion. You might have rumpled and crumpled and doubled and creased and fretted and fridged the outsides of them all to pieces. In short, you might have played the very devil with them, and at the same time not one of the insides of them would have one button the worse for all you had done to them. I believe in my conscience that mine is made up of somewhat after this sort, for never poor jerkin had been tickled off at such a rate as it has been these last 9 months together, and yet I declare the lining to it. As far as I am a judge of the matter, it is not a 3-penny piece the worse. Pell-mell, helter-skelter, ding-dong, cut and thrust, backstroke and forestroke, sideway and long way, have they been trimming it for me. Had there been the least gumminess in my lining, by heaven, it had all of it long ago been frayed and fretted to a thread. You, messieurs the monthly reviewers, how could you cut and slash my jerkin as you did? How did you know but you would cut my lining too? Heartily and from my soul, to the protection of that being who will injure none of us, do I recommend you and your affairs. So God bless you. Only next month, if any of you should gnash his teeth and storm and rage at me, as some of you did last May, in which I remember the weather was very hot, don't be exasperated if I pass it by again with good temper, being determined as long as I live all right, which in my case means the same thing, never to give the honest gentleman a worse word or a worse wish than my Uncle Toby gave the fly which buzzed about his nose all dinner-time. Go, go, poor devil, quoth he, get thee gone. Why should I hurt thee? This world is surely wide enough to hold both thee and me. Chapter 5. Any man, madam, reasoning upwards, and observing the prodigious effusion of blood in my father's countenance, by means of which, as all the blood in his body seemed to rush up into his face, as I told you, he must have reddened, pictorically and scientifically speaking, 6 whole tints and a half, if not a full octave above his natural colour. Any man, madam, but my Uncle Toby, who had observed this, together with the violent knitting of my father's brows and the extravagant contortion of his body during the whole affair, would have concluded my father in a rage. Taking that for granted, had he been a lover of such kind of concord as arises from 2 such instruments being put into exact tune, he would instantly have screwed up his to the same pitch, and then the devil and all had broke loose. The whole piece, madam, must have been played off like the 6th of Avis on Scarlatti, confuria, like mad. Grant me patience. What has confuria, constrepido, or any other hurly-burly word whatever to do with harmony? Any man, I say, madam, but my Uncle Toby, the benignity of whose heart interpreted every motion of the body in the kindest sense the motion would admit of, would have concluded my father angry, and blamed him too. My Uncle Toby blamed nothing but the tailor who cut the pocket-hole. So sitting still till my father had got his handkerchief out of it, and looking all the time up in his face with inexpressible good-will, my father at length went on as follows. Καλό βράδυ.